Here in this sanctuary this morning, we do find the world because we are of and in and from the world. Some of us weary with exhaustion, some bitter from too much testing, some with a yearning for more than the surface life, some aching to give and receive, some eager to cross new thresholds, all of us wounded in some ways, all of us triumphant in some ways. The world is all here among us, within us. And yet, we also consecrate here and now a different time, a different space in which we can practice settling into the deeper waters of life, in which we can feel the ripples of currents that beckon us into the heart of our lives, into the heart of the world. Come into this space where this morning we consider the practice of Sabbath as a discipline of wholeheartedness. Come and be welcome. Those words were from Reverend Emily Wright Magoon, called The Currents That Beckon Us. My name is Jim Rao, and I am a member of our worship council. I'd like to add my welcome to you as well this morning to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. As a beacon of liberal religion, we connect bravely, deepen spiritually, embody justice, and always love. If you are a first-time visitor, we are glad that you have found us this morning and are joining today. Please feel free to let yourself be known to Beth Elliott, our congregational life director. We posted her email in the chat below or to the side, wherever you have it. We are also thankful that in this format, we've been able to bridge the distance and welcome our many visitors from outside Boulder County. You can find more information about the church, our religion, mission, and many weekly opportunities for connection on our website. You can simply Google UUCB or enter uuchurchofboulder.org into your browser. If you haven't yet, everyone should check out our new blog on the website called Touchpoint. Lots of good articles and postings there. Of special note today, we will be having our annual congregational meeting. This is at noon today. There'll be a separate Zoom link, and there'll be some more information at the end of the service, and you can find a link to the event on our website as well. All are welcome. Lastly, please keep your microphones muted and silence your distractions as we enter this time of worship together. Welcome.
This is the day that has been given to us. It is a day that we could not have created, that we could not have earned, and regardless whether or not we deserve it, this day does come to us, and it comes as a gift from the universe, a gift from God, a gift from life itself. So come and let us worship with gratitude for this and so many gifts, with humility for our shortcomings, and with hope that we will continue to transform our lives and to transform our world. And with these words, I too welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. I am Reverend Eric Boza, interim minister, and it is good to be together virtually on this day, to be together in this week, a week when the struggles of our society are so very much with us. And because of the events of this past week, we are shifting topics and will be reflecting in our worship service on some of the events, certainly including the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis and so much of the response that has emerged from his death at the hands of a police officer. But I do also want to note that next week, 1 week from today, our Sunday morning worship will be an interesting revision of an annual tradition for our church and for many Unitarian Universalist churches. We're having flower communion next Sunday. And clearly, as we are gathering virtually and not in physical space, this is not going to work the way it has worked in past years, where everyone's encouraged to bring a flower into the sanctuary with them. But we'll have detailed explanation in tomorrow's Staying in Touch email that comes out from our church, and also in the Friday Messenger email about how we'll be doing our virtual flower communion. But we have something special about it as well. We're going to have a guest speaker joining us for worship next Sunday, Reverend Dr. Peter Zamoczki, who serves as the minister of the Unitarian Church in Prague, in the Czech Republic. The advantages of gathering virtually are that we can have visitors and speakers joining us from long distances. And as he serves the church where the flower communion was first started almost 100 years ago, he will be sharing with us particular insights into this ceremony and its rich history. I look forward to that. And I'm sad to say that the following Sunday, June 14th, will be my last Sunday with you as your interim minister. So I do hope for opportunities to connect with many of you in between now and then. And again, we'll say more in upcoming emails. But let us enter together into this time of worship. And joining by rising as we're able and singing together our opening hymn. The words will be shown on your screen momentarily. It's Jacob's Ladder.
We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing on. Every round goes higher, higher. Every round goes higher, higher. Every round goes higher, higher. We are climbing on. If I stumble, will you help me? If I stumble, will you help me? If I stumble, will you help me? We are climbing on. Though the road is steep and rugged, though the road is steep and rugged, though the road is steep and rugged, we are climbing on. We are climbing on.
If you have a personal chalice or a candle near your computer, like so, I invite you to get ready to light it. As we hear our chalice lighter speak, I also invite you to type into the chat box where it is that your chalice is lit, the street or the neighborhood, or if you're joining us from outside Boulder County, what city. And I'm pleased now to invite Barb Richards to share words for our chalice lighting. Barb?
In 2017, I was asked by Reverend Kelly Dignan to join the steering committee that was forming a UU group which met in Longmont. The goal was not to build a church or fellowship. Maybe that will be dreams for another time, but to create our presence in Longmont for hopefully a new diverse community and UUs that do not go to either the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder or Boulder Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Her hope was that I would work with them to move their dream forward in my own not subtle way. Both Kelly and Reverend Lydia from the fellowship were meeting with the steering committee at that time. There were 3 members from each of our 2 congregations. I joined Cole Hart, former member, and Caitlin Moore from UUCB, along with Natalie Parker, Stephanie Pock, and Scott Yeomans from the fellowship, who became wonderful new UU friends. When Cole resigned, Laura Hinkle joined our group. We met monthly, working on a name, Loop, Longmont Unitarian Universalist Presence, our vision statement, which is connect, transform, liberate. Cole created a beautiful logo for us. He also redesigned the one that our church adopted. We rented space at El Cambio for monthly Sunday afternoon spiritual gatherings. Several Front Range UU ministers leading the services, and hiring Emily Conger, very part-time, the 2nd year as our ministerial leader. Starting this church year, they met twice a month and provided dinner church, now via Zoom. Laura Hinkle remains on the steering committee and has been joined by Billy Abbott. This month's worship theme was threshold, which was perfect for my chalice lighting. I am grateful for the 3 years I was on the threshold of helping to create Loop, and I light our chalice in gratitude for the part that our church played in creating a new model for Unitarian Universalist spiritual gathering, which now has the attention of the UUA. The base of the Cole Richards chalice was created by Dana Lightsey's mother, who was a former potter.
Thank you, Barb. May the many chalice lights now shining across our community inspire us with the knowledge that even in our individual homes and locations, we are together with others in our shared hopes and faith. We now invite all those gathered in your various locations to rise in body or spirit and join together in the spirit of fellowship in community as we all say aloud our congregation's covenant. The words are on the screen.
Gather,
Gather in fellowship,
speak truth to each other, reach out and touch one another, care with each other, and to seek the truth divine.
Disaster.
Well, we have so much that has happened over the last week. Over the course of just a few days, American society seems to have become significantly more complex and, indeed, far more fragile. And yet, the killing of George Floyd this past Monday by a Minneapolis police officer and the responses to it is seen in different ways. For some, this was the most horrific and shocking of tragedies. For others, it just looked like business as usual in America, a place where the deaths of Black people at the hands of law enforcement officers feels all too frequent. Frankly, I believe it was both. And that's to say nothing yet of the widespread protests and increasing property destruction that have spread from South Minneapolis to cities across the country, though I will say more about that later in today's service. But for now, since we all come to these events with our own lens, I'll begin by telling you a story that illustrates my own perspective, just so you understand where I'm coming from. But this is not an attempt to center my own white man's experience. It's not even a story about myself so much as it is about my friend, Prince. No, not the musician. But this is someone who shared the same name as that person. And Jennifer, if you could briefly put the last slide back on the screen, you'll be able to see a couple of photos of my friend Prince. The one just before that, sorry. Thank you. I first met Prince 30 years ago when I was starting my undergraduate studies as a college student. Thank you, Jennifer. Prince was 2 years younger than me, and he was also starting college at the same time. That's how gifted he was. He was part of an early admissions program at my university for the most gifted high school students in the state of Texas in the mathematical and science areas, essentially taking his first 2 years of college as his last 2 years of high school in that program. I had a friend from my high school who started the program at the same time, and through him, Prince and I became friends. We spent several Saturday evenings together, along with others, playing Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, that's what kind of college student I was. I spent my Saturday nights playing Dungeons and Dragons. And he and I had a couple of classes together. He was the person who was so deeply respected by his other students that when their graduation came 2 years later, they did not have a traditional valedictorian speech, but they voted who would be speaking, and Prince won. He had a smile that lit up the room. He was as gregarious as he was intelligent, and he was beloved by everyone. As a mutual friend of ours put it, this is the person we all thought we'd be voting for someday. And I would love to tell you about the many wonderful things he's accomplished in his life. But the reason I can't is because he never got a chance. Because just about 20 years ago, on September 1st, the year 2000, my friend Prince Jones was shot and killed by a police officer serving Prince George's County, Maryland. Even though the shooting happened 2 states away, essentially, my friend Prince, when he left his job at gym, was followed by an undercover police officer for mistaken identity reasons. His vehicle that he had actually driven for years was mistakenly ID'd as one that had been reported stolen. But this officer followed him from Prince George's County, Maryland, through the District of Columbia into Fairfax County, Virginia, where Prince lived. And in an altercation just a couple of blocks from his home, the police officer shot and killed my friend Prince. If this story sounds familiar to you, there's a good chance you've read it, possibly from some of the media coverage at the time, though it has been almost 20 years. But as it turns out, Prince made friends with someone else after he finished the program I knew him in and went to finish his college studies at Howard University, where one of his fellow students was Ta-Nehisi Coates, who has gone on to be an award-winning and acclaimed author, particularly of the book Between the World and Me, a book which many, I think, rightfully call the most profound book about race that has been written in the 21st century. And a good portion of the impetus for writing the book for Coates was telling the story of our mutual friend, Prince. It's hard for me to describe the experience of hearing Coates' acceptance speech for the National Book Award and hearing him dedicate that award to our mutual friend. When those of us who are white encounter these stories of Black people, particularly Black men, being killed, yes, I will say being murdered by police, often we are challenged by others not to look away. I hear that challenge and I absolutely agree with it. For me, for myself though, I cannot look away. I'm not actually capable of ignoring these crimes, as much as sometimes I'd like to. For each new Black man who is killed by a police officer reminds me of my friend. This dynamic of racialized extrajudicial executions is one of the few white privileges that I no longer have. I have so many, but that particular one was taken away from me almost 20 years ago. And yet, my own personal connection to such crimes, let's put that aside, because that challenge is an important one. Indeed, none of us should look away. And certainly my specific loss of this one privilege among so many pales to the experience of Black people and other people of color in this country. Yet the intensity of this week's events make it so much harder for anyone in this nation to disregard all that is happening, all the responses to it, which indeed I will say more about later in today's worship.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Well, we share with one another in so many ways as we worship together. I invite us to take this opportunity for sharing in a different way as we have gathered together virtually, of sharing the blessings and the concerns we carry with us, the life transitions that may have impacted us in recent days. So if you come to this time of worship with a concern or with a blessing, or both, I invite you to open the chat function on Zoom, and in the chat box, type the word blessing or the word concern, or both. There may not be time for sharing details, but if your blessing or concern involves another person or people, you may briefly type who they are as well. And in this symbolic sharing, may we lessen the weight of our concerns and amplify the impact of our blessings. Please share now. these blessings and concerns, we offer our prayerful thoughts and our support as a caring community of faith. I invite us now into a time of deeper sharing, a time of prayer to be followed by a brief period of silence. As we prepare to hear these prayerful words adapted from the Reverend Viola Abbott, I invite you to sit back, let the tension fall away from your muscles. Let the cares and the concerns that have been so much with us drift, however briefly, away from your mind. And as you do so, may you find yourself reaching deep within, reaching far beyond yourself to connect with that which you know as sacred. Let us pray. Spirit of life and of love, God known by so many names and mystery beyond all naming, let us open our hearts, still our minds, and enter this time of prayer. Let us call forth and hold in our hearts the stories of all who come before us, the memories of those who are with us today, and the hope for tomorrow and for all of those who will come after us. Let us be thankful for the opportunity for healing, forgiveness, and reconciliation, while knowing that we can never, should never, forget what has brought us to this day. And let us be glad that voice has not only been given to those whose sorrow and pain have been their companions, but that the stories told by those voices are being received for the goal of redemption and understanding. Let us call upon that light which shines in each of us to give us the strength to walk together into the future and do the work that is necessary and which does not end here today. Let us have the wisdom to lovingly have the conversations we need to have with each other, that we must have with each other, in order to grow this faith in radical love and inclusion. So may it be for us all. Amen. Please join me in a few seconds of silence.
I will be your standing stone. I will stand by you. I will be your standing stone. I will stand by you. I will be your standing stone. I will stand by you. I will be your standing stone. I will stand by you. I will be your standing stone. I will stand by you.
Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery. And we could add to this list as well others, including Tony McDade, whose death at the hands of a police officer in Tallahassee, Florida, just 2 days ago, didn't leave enough time to be added to the graphic we just saw. And their names now join a long and, yes, painful litany of other names. Philando Castile and Alton Sterling and Sandra Bland and Eric Garner, Tamir Rice and Michael Brown and Amadou Diallo and, yes, Prince Jones, and so many more. And yet, the flash of collective response to this killing has arisen with an intensity and a complexity that may even overwhelm their response in 1992 to the not guilty verdict against the Los Angeles police officers who beat Rodney King. There is so much that we could say about these protests, in addition to echoing the call to say their names of those whose lives have been lost. I want to take just a moment to extend that call to say their names. I'm reminded in this week of a long poem, and I'll admit a hard to read poem, by the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. It's entitled, "Please Call Us by Our True Names," in which he speaks of the complexities of so many of the aspects of our society, from the point of view of those who have been harmed and those who are harming. So I want to lift up just a couple of names that I believe to be true about the violence and the chaos that we are seeing around us in the last few days, starting in Minneapolis and now in so many other cities as well. And in that vein, I'll offer a name born out of one socio-political point of analysis, a name born out of one point about our work on anti-racism and anti-oppression, and a name that emerges from a theological point. But first, these protests that we have seen throughout the nation, certainly starting in Minneapolis, have so often been described as rioting or looting. And I find those labels, those names, problematic. Not because there's no rioting occurring, because there is. Not because there's no looting occurring, because yes, there has been. But to focus on those aspects ignores so much else of the motivation behind what is happening. And I do agree with so many online who have been referring to these events as an uprising. Now, I'll confess, 28 years ago, when the so-called riots broke out in South Central LA and other cities after the verdict against the police officers in the Rodney King case, I was surprised and confused at the time by the people who referred to these events as an uprising. From my young male suburban white perspective, I didn't see that. I do see it now. There is a political element to this. There is a longing for justice in a way that has been so denied that I think makes that label of uprising so much more appropriate. And a second point, as we think in terms, those of us particularly who are white, of what it means for us to be supportive of or engaged with the protests that have been happening, I think it's a key lesson for us to bear in mind that it is not our responsibility. I'd say we don't even have the right as white people to tell Black folks, Indigenous folks, other people of color how to protest. Forgive me for being blunt about it. I dare say that our ancestors abandoned that right for us 400 years ago. But the label, the name I want to lift up is a name for those of us who are white to claim as we engage in supporting the calls for justice throughout our nation. And that name is follower, not leader, follower. I'd argue that the most responsible way that those of us who are white can respond to the racialized violence we see around us is to take our lessons on how to do so, take our marching orders on how to do so from people of color who have been engaged in the fight. I am reminded of the words of a leader in the Black Lives Matter movement for many years, the Reverend Osagyefo Sekou. Now, Reverend Sekou is a Black man, but middle-aged and a cisgendered man who has very publicly said, I am not a leader in this movement, I am a follower. I take my orders from 23-year-old queer women. And in that spirit, I'm inspired also to be a follower as well, to take my orders from those who are leaders in this work. And there's one other name to lift up, and it's a theological name for this day in particular. For in the Christian religious tradition out of which Unitarian Universalism arose, forgive me, this day in the Christian liturgical year is the day of Pentecost. It's the day that celebrates the story told early in the book of Acts in Christian scriptures, which describes the Holy Spirit descending upon the followers of Jesus after his resurrection and anointing not only them, but the people in the market nearby with what are described as tongues of flame, setting people to speaking in different tongues and understanding the words of one another. It is often seen in the Christian tradition as the birth of the church. And therefore, I think it actually is a date that has some relevance to us Unitarian Universalists, where we focused in a different way this week. Had the events of this week not happened, I would have said more about that. But I want to lift up the words of an acquaintance who lives in Minneapolis, as it happens, very near the epicenter of the uprising there. His name is Mark Van Steenwyk. He is both a Mennonite pastor and a leader, surprisingly, perhaps, in the small but active Christian anarchist movement. So he's both a left-wing anarchist activist and a Christian pastor. He has tried to be present to this time in a particular way. And he wrote a couple of days ago about the fires that were spreading through his neighborhood. It's fitting then that Sunday is Pentecost, when fire from heaven danced on the heads of the followers of the radical Palestinian Jew who proclaimed a new world. I, he added, want to see a new world. I long for justice. I lament the loss of 3 grocery stores. Now my neighbors and I have less access to food. I lament the damage to local restaurants and shops that we rely upon for various services, but my hope burns even stronger than that lament. I hope, he adds, that justice will rise from these ashes, and I pray for transformation and healing. And it is in that spirit that I find hope even in these hard times. Hope which I'll say more about how we can engage in just a couple of moments.
The reading this morning is by someone you may know, Kenny Wiley. He is now an award-winning newspaper journalist based in Houston, Texas. He previously served as director of faith formation at Prairie UU Church in Parker, Colorado, and with our denominational magazine, The UU World. These words come from his blog, A Full Day, in a blog post from 2015 entitled A Unitarian Universalist Black Lives Matter Theology. The first of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism reads, Unitarian Universalist congregations affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Some UU religious educators refer to the first principle as the principle we remember. Indeed, it's the one we so often invoke as we tell confused friends about our faith. We believe every person is important. It's beautiful and simple, and too often not quite true. Rather, the first principle of Unitarian Universalism stands as an unrealized promise. It is a map of the work done centuries and decades ago, and a map of the work yet to do. Most of us in the faith are here because we felt welcome, at last, here. Some of us were too agnostic somewhere else. Some of us weren't vindictive enough somewhere else. We were too working class somewhere else. We were too lesbian somewhere else. We were too nerdy somewhere else, too introverted somewhere else, too gay married somewhere else. Many of us are here because this faith and the people in it affirmed, you may not be perfect, but your life matters just the same. That's what's on the line now.
I found this photo not from us, but on the UUA national website. I suspect some of you are in this photo. Was posted just 4 years ago. And it reminds me that there's a phrase that can be meaningful to us in this time that many of us have heard. The phrase is this: comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. It's been attributed to many people over the years. It actually was originally coined around 100 years ago, a little bit more, by a journalist who was commenting on the tendency of other journalists to take that approach. He meant it as a criticism. I take it as good advice. And this call to comfort those who are afflicted and afflict those who are comfortable also calls us to find where we are on that spectrum. And an important part of the reality for those of us who, like myself, are white, is that we white people have been pretty comfortable, at least compared to the experiences of people of color. Even when we haven't felt that comfortable, we comparatively have been so. And so the first lesson that I draw from this advice in this hard and uncomfortable time, this discomforting time, is that it's probably true for me and for a lot of us that we're going to have to stay in that period of discomfort for a while. If we feel afflicted, we're not necessarily wrong to do so, but let us also keep in mind those who have been so more thoroughly and deeply afflicted for so much longer. And I advocate this not to discourage us, but to acknowledge a reality of where we are now, for by acknowledging that reality, for calling it by its true name, then we prepare ourselves better for doing what it is we can do to support the work for greater justice that is, in some cases, almost literally blowing up all around us right now. And there is so much that can be done. And I want to advocate for just a couple of those. One is taking the advice, the leadership of those who are people of color. In that spirit, I share with you this quote from the Daily Camera, from the local newspaper here in Boulder. Words that were spoken yesterday at a rally in support of justice for George Floyd that happened here in Boulder. The speaker was Maurice Cox, who lives, I believe, in Louisville, a Black man, who said these words as quoted in the camera. I wanted you to know that the people of color who walk in this community as marginalized people walk around in another America, facing other trauma that you will never have to experience, Cox said, speaking particularly to the white people who were gathered. But, he adds, we will never be at the dinner table with your racist uncle. We will never be at the kitchen table with your spouse who says something like those blacks or those racial slur. But you're there. The places that you occupy and take up space, you need to say something, do something. That's what I hear as part of the discomfort that I as a white person have to struggle with, is the call to have those uncomfortable conversations, to call out those in my life that I may be in relationship with, but who are speaking against a just and an equitable view that denies our first principle. And there's advice we can take from others, and I think particularly of someone we just heard from, person who I also know personally, Kenny Wiley. When he worked for our denominational magazine, the UU World, he wrote several articles for it, including this one from about 5 years ago, entitled 5 Ways to Support Black Lives Matter. This is at the time when the movement was reaching its peak of awareness in many people's eyes. And he spoke of a few things that we can do that I think speak to us just as directly this week as they did 5 years ago. And the first is to learn. Learn more about the racial justice conversations that are happening and getting up to speed. He mentions a few things that can be read that are now a few years old. We could add to it more recent books like White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, and others. And yes, Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. But another advice he has for us is to connect. And that means connecting with those activists and those movements that are working for justice as well, not just nationally, but in our local community also. And support, offering tangible support, food and water for protesters, money for the movements and the organizations supporting them. We're working on, the staff and a couple of lay leaders here at UCB are working on gathering resources that we will be sharing in a blog post tomorrow. We need just another 24 to 36 hours to get it ready, but we will have available tomorrow a list of resources which include places where people can donate. Some of you may have seen these elsewhere online, but perhaps not seen all of them. So I invite you to keep an eye out for that and to take advantage of what you can. If your financial means allow you to donate your money. If not, to donate your time. But he also advises us to engage, to make it known, our support for justice in these times, and to use contemporary language, to stay woke, to continue pointing to the ever-growing list of victims of state violence, racial profiling, or other racial injustices. Those are Kenny Wiley's words. And to continue to grapple with the magnitude of the work ahead and refuse to succumb to the temptation to ignore these racial realities. And one other thing that we are working towards here at UUCB, we do have a racial justice task force as part of this congregation. It has been less active in recent months, but is in the process of getting more active. You may feel yourself called to be engaged with this work through our church. And if it's something you're even considering, I invite you to let us know. Please, particularly Beth Elliott invites you to contact her directly. Our contact info is put in the chat box. You can find it through our church website as well. And she'll help you connect with the people who are working on engaging this work at a congregational level. And also, it is so easy for me to say, and yes, hard to feel, but there is something to be said for this moment which may feel hopeless for many, and yet in which there is a deeper hope. A hope that some genuine transformation, at least some improvements, may come from this perilous and precarious moment in which we find ourselves. It's not going to be easy in the short term, but by sharing the resources that we can, by sharing the support that we can offer, and by sharing with one another our concerns and our fears as well as our hopes, we're opening ourselves to engage this hard work in a way which reminds us, even in these times when we may be physically distanced from one another, that we can work together and add that much more energy and add that much more encouragement to the work of justice in our lives and in our world. So may it be for us all. Amen.
During this season of not meeting in the same physical space, we nonetheless continue our ministries, including new online ministries described in our church's website's new blog. We continue to welcome offering donations now through online giving, as well as checks mailed to the church. The link for UUCB's online contribution page has just been added as a comment to this chat, and it can also be found on the UUCB webpage. We especially welcome those who can set up monthly online payments, as our church pays no fees for recurring payments. We also continue our support for our nonprofit community partners in our Share Our Plate program, Share the Plate program. And for the month of May, we have been sharing our plate with the Longmont Unitarian Universalist Presence, also known as LUUP, L-U-U-P. Here's a testimonial from Stephanie Pock. Stephanie is a LUUP steering committee member from the Boulder Valley UU Fellowship. I love the engaging nature of our gatherings. While participation is always optional, it is at the heart of our dinner church experience. And when a 5-year-old is sharing her experience of a big theme like transformation with a 55-year-old, it can be surprising. Or when a 9-year-old is teaching a 29-year-old the best way to fold an airplane, a paper airplane, it can be exhilarating. Earlier in our short history, when we were still experimenting and dinner church wasn't our way, we occasionally had guest ministers lead our monthly gatherings. They were lovely worship services, and yet I would feel deeply disappointed. I needed opportunities to interact with others and explore with markers, games, music, and movement. On the surface, you might assume that I'm just looking for a light version of spiritual growth, something fun and easygoing. Actually, I find that actively engaging in experiences grounded in ritual and multi-generational community can be magically transforming. You are all welcome to join the Loop for dinner church, which is the first and third Friday evenings of each month. You will find Loop within Facebook at The Loop is the name of the group. So now I ask that you please give generously so that the Loop can continue doing its important outreach work beyond congregational walls, and that we can experiment with new ways of worshiping together. May we be as generous as we can. We now receive the offering. Sharing our time, gifts, and money is a way we offer gratitude for this church and our Boulder community. Thank you for sharing. Please rise now in body or spirit for our closing hymn, One More Step. Words are on the screen.
And so as we go forth from this sacred time and the many sacred places we've gathered, as the flames in our chalices extinguish, let us go forth graced with blessings of being together, blessings of freedom, blessings of wholeness. For though this time of worship now ends, our service begins anew. So let us continue to find ever new ways to serve this oh so hurting world in the spirit of love. Go in peace.